Welcome to Latchkey History, and welcome to the death of the penny. We all know about it, and it makes some of us sad. It is, in essence, the end of an era. As of November 2025, the United States has officially ceased production of the penny. It was a decision decades in the making, fought over by economists, sentimentalists, and Zinc lobbyists. But lo and behold, the gavel finally fell. To understand why we finally said goodbye to the coin that is likely sitting in a jar on many of our dressers right now, we have to go back in time, back to the very birth of the American monetary system. The story of the penny begins in 1793. That year, the newly formed United States Mint in Philadelphia struck its very first coins for circulation. Back then, they weren't the small bronze discs we now know and love. Instead, they were massive. Today, they are called large cents. They were nearly the size of a modern half dollar and made of 100% pure copper. Just imagine carrying a pocket full of those bad boys around. They were heavy, clunky, and had a distinct metallic smell. The good part? Back in 1793, a penny actually bought you something. You could actually buy food, drink, or supplies with 1 single cent back then. The design for the original US penny featured a wild-haired Lady Liberty on the front. On the reverse, there was originally a chain symbolizing the strength of the Union. But the public hated the chain. The general consensus was that it looked too much like the chains of slavery, so it was quickly replaced by a wreath. For over 60 years, this heavy coppered disc was the U.S. standard. But history has a funny way of repeating itself. By the 1850s, the price of copper had risen so much that the metal in the coin was worth more than its sticker price. Some people saw the opportunity to make a few cents and started melting them down for profit. So in 1857, the mint made a radical change. They shrank the penny, and the Flying Eagle cent was then introduced. This was the birth of the small cent that we all know and love today. It was also the first time the mint moved away from pure copper pennies, mixing in nickel to keep costs down. It was a lighter, brighter coin, but the Flying Eagle design was difficult to strike, so it didn't last very long. 2 years later, in 1859, the mint transitioned to the Indian head penny, which would go on to be the coin that fueled the Civil War era, the Wild West, and the Industrial Revolution. However, in 1909, the face that would define the penny for over a century had finally arrived. To celebrate the 100th birthday of Abraham Lincoln, President Theodore Roosevelt commissioned a new design. It turned out to be a massive break from tradition. Up until then, true red, white, and blue Americans didn't want real people on their coins. They instead preferred figures of liberty and freedom. Back then, putting a president on a coin was considered by many something that you just don't do. But the love for Lincoln was so strong that the rule was eventually broken. And so the Lincoln wheat penny was born. On the front, the stoic bust of the 16th U.S. president. On the back, 2 stalks of wheat, symbolizing national prosperity. It was simple, beautiful, and instantly popular among almost everyone. The Lincoln penny would then go on to see us through the best and worst of the 20th century. And it was during the worst of times that the penny underwent its most dramatic change. In 1943, World War II was raging throughout much of the world. Copper, still a main ingredient for pennies, was vital for the war effort. It was used in everything from shell casings to telephone wire. So for 1 year only, they struck pennies out of a zinc-coated steel. If you've ever seen a silver penny, it's a 1943 steel cent. They were magnetic, they rusted, and people largely hated them because they looked too much like dimes. But they were a necessary sacrifice for the war effort. But as soon as 1944 rolled around, the mint salvaged spent shell casings from the battlefield to bring the copper penny back. In 1959, for the 150th anniversary of Lincoln's birth, the wheat stalks were retired. In their place, they inserted the Lincoln Memorial. This is the penny that most of us grew up with. If you look closely at the tiny memorial on the back, you can actually see a little statue of Lincoln sitting inside, just like the real thing. The feature was an engineering marvel at the time. But while the design for the most part remained stable, the economics were again crumbling. By the 1970s, inflation was eating away at the dollar. And just like back in 1857, the price of copper was rising. By the early 1980s, the copper content in a single penny was again worth more than 1 cent. Subsequently, the US Mint was losing money on every single coin they struck, and again people were hoarding them to melt them down. So in 1982, they quietly changed the recipe. If you drop a penny dated before 1982 on a table, it makes a high-pitched ringing sound. That sound is solid copper. If you drop a penny from 1983 or later, it will instead answer with a dull, flat thud. That sound is because the post-1982 penny is a lie. Instead of copper, it's made of almost entirely zinc, a cheap gray metal with an incredibly thin plating of copper on top, merely to keep up appearances. This change, however, bought the penny another 40 years of life. But as many surmised, it was simply a band-aid on a bullet wound. As the US moved into the 21st century, the penny morphed into a zombie currency. It was dead, but somehow it kept flinching. Continuous long-term inflation meant that a penny in 2020 bought you virtually nothing. You couldn't buy a gumball. You couldn't use it in a parking meter. And you certainly couldn't use it in a vending machine. So the debate over its existence heated back up. Many looked at our neighbors to the north. Canada had abolished their penny in 2012. They then simply rounded cash transactions to the nearest nickel. Meanwhile, in the US, the cost to produce the penny kept climbing. By 2024, it cost the US Mint nearly 3.7 cents to manufacture one. Not a good business model. For every penny made, taxpayers lost nearly 3 cents. In 2024 alone, the Mint lost nearly $90 million on the penny, and obviously, something needed to change. Arguments for keeping it were mostly sentimental, but the logic of the spreadsheet finally outweighed the nostalgia. In late 2025, the order finally came down. The production lines were stopped, the planchettes were recycled, and the dies were vaulted. So what now? The penny is no longer being produced, but it definitely hasn't vanished. There are estimated to be over 200 billion pennies still in circulation, many sitting in cup holders, buried in couch cushions, and filling those giant water cooler jugs, no doubt. Today, we are in the phase-out era of the penny. Retailers are now rounding cash transactions to the nearest 5 cents. But electronic transactions, credit cards, digital wallets, those stay exact. The penny will remain legal tender. You can still spend them if you want to be that person counting out 85 cents at the register. But slowly, inevitably, they will disappear from our pockets and our memory. They will become what the large cent became before them. A curiosity, a collector's item. A tangible piece of history that tells the story of a time when 1/100th of a dollar actually meant something. The penny had a long good run. From the copper of the founding fathers to the zinc of the digital age, it served its purpose for 232 years. But time and inflation waits for no coin. So if you have one in your pocket or find one in the back of your closet, hold on to it, because they ain't making any more of them. The penny has finally transitioned from being a coin that most people barely even look at. Now, it's an artifact. Thanks for watching The Death of the Penny. And see you next time on Latchkey History.